just kind of list as many plants as you can remember that have been introduced to the trade as a direct result of the work at Tom Dodd Nursery, and you in particular. And there's a lot. From, say, start with Japanese hollies.
Let me say this. The first, way back, Dad and Mr. Sawada were pretty close, and they went to fishing together. They went over to the Gulf sometime, if you can imagine Mr. Sawada liking to fish. And it'd be hard to imagine if you know his children, but he's had some wonderful children. One became a Methodist preacher, and of course Tom, you know him. George worked for the city, and George was in the. He was ready to go to war. He was in ROTC, and he was an officer, but he had asthma so bad he had to quit the army. And then they had a sister that was a real sweet lady, and but Dad would some things Dad had. He would do a lot of trading with Mr. Sawada, and Mr. Sawada at one time gave Dad quite a lot of Camellia sasanqua seedlings, and also some Oriental magnolia seedlings. And and we planted the Oriental magnolia west of the house, and some of them made real fine cultivars. We'd never named any of them. We put numbers on them, and some of it's been publicized in some of the books, and some people have. And we sent some to the National Arboretum. But the Camellia sasanquas, we did name one Miss Auburn and one Crimson Tide, and that was the first ones we named. And there are pictures in the International Camellia book, pictures of both of them. And then also Mr. Sawada did work with azaleas, and we planted some of his azalea seedlings, and we got one that we named after our mother and our sister. We called one Bessier Dodd. It was a pink hose and hose similar to Carl Bell's, but it wasn't forced like Carl Bell's. It wasn't one that the florist could use, and so it wasn't as valuable to us. And one we named Adelaide Victory Dodd. It was a purple form, and it wasn't the best seller either. And those were the first things that we named, and that was some time back. And before we really got into planting seeds. And then, of course, I in the early 50s, I started working with azalea, with native azaleas. And as I said, I was working with them. With my mother, we would dig these so-called bush honeysuckles out of the woods, but later on, I started collecting seeds, the seed from different azaleas and different spots where I could find species, you know. You go over here in Escatol River area, you could find Austrinum, and you go certain places in East Alabama or West Georgia, you can find Prunifolium, and you go another spot, you can find Alabamense, and so tried to get pure species if we could. And later on, then the hybrid, I guess the first azalea hybrid we did Austrinum times calendulaceum. Then we crossed that with oblongifolium, and that made a real attractive. It gave us some nice colors, pastel colors, and azaleas that we hadn't had before. And of course, people have to be interested and see them before they can make a decision as to whether to buy them or not. And if you don't sell them or you haven't gained much, you have them to sell. And we did. The Garden Club of America did give us an award for doing work with native azaleas and selling them at a price where the normal average person could afford to buy one, because up to that people would dig these plants and separate them in the woods and try to pot them up, and it took time and took effort, and the plants wasn't that good anyway. But it cost a whole lot more to do that than it did for cuttings. We learned how to grow them from seedlings or cuttings, and so we could, even though we sold wholesale, we could. The retailer could sell them at a reasonable price, and people could afford them. Then we got into other native plants, mostly members of the heath family, but not only just that, other native plants that we thought had some potential. And one of the most interesting one is a little Pierce that we looked for in Alabama, because it was Dr. Moore. It said it was in Mobile County, but I could never find it. And he said it was also in Baldwin County. I could never find it in Baldwin County. And Gene Klein and I found it in Georgia, Okefenokee Swamp, where Dr. Harper said it was. And we found it most unusual places. It was one of the few members of the heath family that are climbers. Now, if you're growing it in a pot here, it's a little shrub, but in its native habitat, it grows up Taxodium ascendens, the pond cypress, and grows on up several feet under the bark. It runs up the stems, runs up the trunk, and blooms up maybe 8 or 10 feet high off the Okefenokee Swamp and those places. And I thought that was a fascinating place to see cottonmouths and Pierce filarifolia in the same place. But it never occurred to me that a cottonmouth would bite me.
Well, you mentioned Dr. Moore. I guess you've met Dr. Durr, Dr. Moore.
Well, Dr. Moore, I never met him. He was a German pharmacist that lived in Mobile, and he wrote Alabama Flora in 1901, 1,100 pages. It's a magnificent book. I've got some copies of it. Anywhere I could find copies, I would, and especially copies that were redone. Now, the first copies were made difficult to read because the paper is about shot. But I've got some that was redone in Germany, and they were sent to England to a secondhand bookstore, so I found them. And also, Auburn has most of our library now than what we had in the office, and so we wanted to share them up there because of the facilities and the fact that more people could see them than, and they could put them on the internet or put them on computers or whatever, and use them for research and so forth. They took 16 plates from the botanicals, and they enlarged them to maybe pictures this wide, about this tall, and put them in study halls up there. And I noticed them right away when we went up there, and so they've got quite a bit of our library and some from Uncle Bill.
about Auburn? Why is Auburn so special to you?
Well, I guess as a kid, Steve and I used to if we wanted to go to New Orleans to a ball game, we could thumb over there, you know. We could go to New Orleans, and our parents didn't seem to, who's this lady coming here? I think I've seen her before.
She's right attractive, isn't she?
She is attractive. How are you doing, sweetie? How's the baby?
Well, Jonathan just called me and said doesn't have workouts, and I need to come get him. He just threw up again 10 minutes ago. So
Who's that? Who's that? Jonathan?
No, Will.
Jonathan needs to be picked up at the school, and Will's throwing up.